Now we're going to put the finishing touches to our images, and I'm going to be showing you a few tips and tricks along the way. In this lesson, we'll begin our retouching workflow starting in Lightroom. Lightroom is a photo editing software in Adobe's Creative Cloud. So let me show you. Now that we have our final images imported into Lightroom, I'm going to be showing you our process as we prep our stills for Photoshop. And so we have all three of our final images here. And we have one additional shot as well, which if you remember, we took an extra photograph with a gray card in it. And this was for the purpose of color correction in post-production. And so I'll go ahead and show you that now. So we head over to our Develop panel. And the first thing that we want to do is grab our little white balance eyedropper tool. And essentially what we're doing is telling Lightroom what we think is a neutral, which we know that this gray card right here is a neutral. So we'll go ahead and click on it and automatically corrects the color of our images. It is a super simple way to get your color correcting down and makes our lives easier. So now we're going to go down to the bottom here. And under the Lens Corrections tab, we're going to check off Remove Chromatic Aberration and Enable Profile Corrections. And that is essentially going to remove any lens distortion in our images. Now I know that this image isn't our final image. This image is blown out, we've got the gray card in it, but all of the adjustments that we just made on this image, we're going to go ahead and copy them and paste them onto the rest of the images. Now, one by one, we're going to paste the settings, and you're going to see that the color is being corrected as well as the lens corrections. Now that we've pasted all of the color correction and lens correction settings, we're going to make some additional adjustments on each individual image. And this includes highlights, shadows, overall exposure, and even a little bit of some transforming. So let's get to it. Now for this image, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in and out because I want to make sure that I can see detail. I can tell right off the bat that the whites are a little bit blown out, so I want to bring down the highlights to get back some detail. I'll also bring down some of the whites as well, make sure we get some more detail there. And I'm actually pretty happy with how the shadows look. They're not too harsh or too dark, so I'm going to leave it at that. But I will bring up a little bit of the exposure, just enough, and while keeping these highlights and whites down. Don't want to lose detail. That's the most important thing. And I always like to look at a before and after to make sure that the adjustments that I'm making are actually making a difference. Now I'm pretty happy with that. Now for the second image, I can already tell that my whites are looking okay, but my darks are pretty dark. I'm actually going to bring up the entire exposure a bit. Now I don't want to get too crazy because I don't want to lose detail, right? But if I do end up bringing up the exposure, I want to make sure that I'm also bringing down the highlights so that I don't lose any detail in the whites. And like I mentioned, the darks are a little bit dark, so I'm going to bring up those shadows. And I'm also going to bring up the blacks as well a little bit. And I'm pretty happy with that. Now for this image, we've got a lot of lines going on with the props in the image as well as the horizon line from the two particle boards meeting in the middle. So I'm going to go down to the transform section and I'm going to select the guided transform tool. And the guided is awesome because it really gives you a lot more control and you can apply guides onto the image to tell Lightroom what lines you want to fix. So we'll start by doing this line right here. And I want to make sure that as I'm adding each guide that I am paying attention to all the details in the image. This image is going to end up being an Instagram story. So, I'm not too worried about what's happening on the sides because this probably is going to end up getting cropped out. But what I do want to be careful about is these squiggles. I don't want these to disappear from the image or get cropped out. I want them to remain in the actual image. Next, I'll try the horizon line here. Perfect. And then I'll also try this one right here. And there we go. So the maximum number of guides is 4. So you want to make sure that you are being very selective about what guides you are adding onto the image. So I'm going to make sure that I'm working with just the 4 that I have while not cropping out anything. I think this squiggly down here at the bottom, I'm not too worried about it being cropped out, but I do want to keep the one up here intact. So I want to make sure that I'm adjusting these to make sure that I'm not cropping that out. Even if it's just like a little sliver, I want to make sure that I can still have that edge there. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to hit done. I'm not worried about the edges because this image is probably going to get cropped to a 9:16 anyway. Okay, now for our third and final image, I am going to go up here and bring up the overall exposure. And now I want to make sure that I am bringing back some of the details in the whites. And I'm also going to bring up the shadows as well. And for this image as well, I'm going to also fix some of the lines like we did in the last image. I'm going to go down to the bottom here, select guided once again, and I'm going to add a guide here on this prop, as well as one over here on this block. I'm also going to add another one over here, and one more here. And now there we go. Now all of our lines are fixed and that looks good. And I want to make sure I take a look at the before and after to see the adjustments that I've made. That looks a lot better. The final images are a lot warmer, which that's how they're supposed to look, less cool. And we brought back some of the details and fixed some of our lines. So I just showed you our editing workflow in Lightroom, and now we're going to head into the next lesson where I will share with you how to finalize your images and export them in Adobe Photoshop.